Welcome to the Power of Now What, Series 2, Still Now. In this series, I'm sharing the various spiritual practices and meditative principles that have helped me to recover from anxiety, depression, addiction, and obesity, and helped me to move into a life of peace, health, happiness, and serenity. I'm exploring how these profound ancient teachings are actually more relevant now than ever. In the modern world, there is much psychological suffering such as anxiety, depression, feelings of loneliness, issues with self-image, and struggles with identity itself. And many also find themselves lacking a sense of meaning or purpose. And without this meaning or purpose, life feels flat, dull, devoid of energy and direction. And often we see these issues as problems of our current technological and cultural landscape, but it comes as a bit of a surprise that actually these issues have been going on since the dawn of humanity. They are not caused by modern life, but they are actually inherent to the human condition itself. And many spiritual practices were developed as a remedy for this very suffering. And as there are thousands of years of wisdom, energy, resources that have been poured into this very subject, it makes sense for us to learn a little from what has gone before. I've always found it very interesting when I read accounts and writings of ancient monks, spiritual teachers, gurus, sages, shamans, saints, priests and priestesses as they speak on their experiences with mental and emotional health. They might use slightly different language to the language we would use today, but whenever you read these ancient accounts, you find that they were not so different to us. They struggled and wrestled with exactly the same psychological problems. Although we do have unique challenges in the modern world that is presented by the new technological and cultural landscape, particularly when it comes to our communication technology, our social media, and the ways that we now can interact with each other, that is facilitated by these new technologies. It is clear that the human condition itself has not changed at all. The modern world didn't make us this way. We've always been this way. After all, there is no such thing as time. Which isn't to say that the past didn't happen, but it is to say that the past never went anywhere. It was now then, and it is still now. It is my hope that I can share a little of what I've learned over the years, and I endeavour to use practical examples from the modern world rather than getting bogged down in texts, scriptures, theories and concepts. I choose instead to explain how we can apply the essence of spiritual teachings and meditative practices so that we can just get to the juice of it. We can find the humanity of the intention behind the messages so that we can apply these practices to our daily lives. It's a sense of, to use one analogy, I don't really know why this has just come to mind, but if you think about what oil is, we know that oil is an incredibly valuable, very useful substance, and it sits very deep underground, and it is generated by years and years and years, eons of pressure that pushes down into the earth, and we have to dig down deep in order to extract it, to extract this ancient material from the earth, this incredibly powerful substance, this incredibly valuable and useful substance. It's a little bit like that when we delve through the ancient teachings. It's as though we're digging through our history so that we can extract the juice, and sometimes we do have to break through layers and layers of mud and rock in order to do so. I don't know why that metaphor just came to mind. It is kind of relevant to the subject today, actually. In this episode, we are diving deep into emotion itself. As in this series we're addressing mental and emotional well-being, we must at some point become aware of the emotions that are ordinarily hidden from our consciousness through repression, avoidance, and resistance. There are emotions that are deep within our being that for many different reasons are hidden from the light of consciousness, and there in the darkness they fester. Although they are hidden from view in our ordinary lives, they are not something we are consciously aware of. They still hold a remarkable power over our daily lives. They drastically influence our health, happiness, and well-being. They influence our thoughts, our decisions, and our behaviors. These are the deeply repressed emotions that were repressed very early on in our lives. These are very primal emotions. Today we're going to discuss how to bring these unconscious parts of ourselves, our emotional selves, to the light so that we can address them directly. We can apply a loving, unconditional acceptance of these emotions and recognize that although these emotions were buried for a reason, they don't need to stay buried any longer. We can bring them up out into the light, and once we're consciously aware of them and we feel safe in the presence of these emotions, we will find that our emotional and mental health drastically improves. And I'm speaking from experience here. This is an area that, although was possibly the most challenging, the most painful for me in my recovery and transformation, it was also the most powerfully transformative, and there was a direct correlation between the extent to which I was willing to feel deeply repressed emotion had a direct correlation on the improvements to my mental and emotional health, and very rapidly as well. This is something that I like to emphasize when it comes to this work, because often things are seen as like a long, arduous kind of process, but there is something profoundly rapid about the transformation that occurs when we bring the light of loving, conscious awareness to the deeply repressed emotional parts of ourselves. So we're going to discuss how to bring these unconscious parts of ourselves to the light so that we can address them directly, and we can stop them dictating our lives from the darkness, from unconsciousness. We are simply, it's not that we're creating anything new, we're simply becoming aware of something that is there already. And by bringing this darkness up into the light, the unconscious parts of ourselves into the conscious parts of ourselves, we integrate these deeply repressed and, yes, painful emotions. But it is the very process of this integration, as we bring light to the darkness, that dissolves the shadow. Today, we're going to be doing shadow work. When speaking on this particular subject, it is customary to give a warning, and it is courteous to do so. So just letting you know that we are going to be delving into some material that is potentially very uncomfortable, potentially quite painful, potentially quite upsetting. Just letting you know that ahead of time, because forewarned is forearmed on this subject in particular. So as we speak on this today, if you do come across some material you were previously unconscious of, it can be very surprising, and the surprising nature and the intensity of some of these emotions can take us by surprise. So don't panic if that happens, essentially. It's all perfectly safe. All of it is perfectly safe. It's just painful. It's just uncomfortable. Please understand, this is coming from a place of love. All of this is coming from a place of love. I've been through this process myself. I know how painful it is, but I also know how necessary it is. By its very nature, we are bringing the light of loving consciousness to some areas that could have been repressed for a very long time. And it's always worth recognizing and understanding that we repress these emotions for a reason. We don't repress emotion for no reason. We don't avoid or resist emotions that are comfortable, that are not painful. Anything that's comfortable and not painful and pleasant, we allow into the light of conscious awareness automatically. There's a reason that some of these parts of our emotional selves have been hidden for so long. And just by knowing this, it will allow us to go deeper into this work, just understanding that emotion is not dangerous. It can be painful, but it's not dangerous. And that's the first thing I'd like to speak on today, actually, is that all of this, with all the warnings and things, I see it on any video like this, it always starts with these very sort of intense sounding warnings and all of these talk of triggers and how dangerous the shadow can be and all of that. I actually think that's part of the problem. I think it's our fear of emotion that is a mechanism of repression in itself. I'll explain what I mean there by way of an analogy. So I'm a personal trainer and a fitness instructor, and to this day I find it absolutely baffling when people come to a gym to sign up for a gym membership. They have to sign all of these forms saying that, if some absolutely awful catastrophe was to befall you, that you wouldn't be suing the gym. I mean, yeah, fair enough and everything. But on these forms, there's always a part that says, please consult a doctor before even attempting any exercise. I've always found that very strange, because exercise is the healthiest thing that you can do. But this speaks to this kind of background cultural kind of belief that exercise is somehow dangerous and bad for you. And it's not. It's the healthiest thing you can do. It's actually far more dangerous to not exercise. That's the danger. But you don't have to sign any forms to sit on the couch watching Netflix with your life. Everyone will just leave you well alone. But the moment you start trying to do some exercise to actually improve your health, there's a bunch of health warnings. How strange is that? And I believe that comes from the fact that exercise is painful. Physical exercise, it's extraordinarily uncomfortable. And when something is painful and uncomfortable, we assume, therefore, it must be dangerous. And so that kind of mentality has been going on for so long that all of this about seeking advice of a medical professional before going for a 5-minute jog has found its way onto these forms and into the cultural psyche. I mean, it's like you need a GP and 2 nurses to give the go-ahead before you can even go for a cycle ride. It's ridiculous. But it's the same thing when it comes to emotion. For some reason, we think of our emotional selves as something that, you shouldn't even attempt to go anywhere near unless you have like the supervision of like a psychiatrist, a mental health professional. And look, I know that yes, in certain cases and if you have suffered particularly from, well, many different things, then it is a good idea to see a professional, absolutely. But these are your emotions. You shouldn't be afraid of them. You shouldn't be afraid to face them. It is our fear about facing those emotions that is causing the repression itself. And I'm hoping this is going to be part of a cultural shift, as hopefully humanity is becoming more and more conscious, thanks in part to the new communication technology, that in the same way that there is now an increased consciousness about the health benefits of physical exercise and taking this responsibility on yourself and taking the accountability on yourself, and that exercise is not dangerous, it's actually the most healthy thing that you can do, and that actually sitting on the couch and doing nothing is far more dangerous than any exercise could ever be. I hope that we'll have a similar sort of renaissance when it comes to our emotional and mental health and well-being. We can face the deeper unconscious parts of ourselves. We can take a look at this. We can take that responsibility to just, with good education, and obviously we're being responsible with this. If we need the support, get hold of the support, absolutely. But we must understand emotion is not dangerous in itself. Now, the behavior that can arise out of emotion can be dangerous. It can be. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes from. That's why people believe that certain emotions are dangerous emotions, is the behavior that can result from them. But the emotion itself is not actually a problem. And that's the first kind of inquiry that we're going into here, is actually just asking yourselves, your belief around emotion. Do we believe that painful emotions, we could say negative emotions or afflictive emotions, are they a problem? We could even ask, is our anxiety a problem? Is feeling sad a problem? Is feeling grief a problem? Is feeling rage a problem? Is it a problem in and of itself? Now, naturally, the behaviours that can arise in the presence of those emotions, yes, absolutely, they can be a problem. But the emotion itself, if we were to completely sever the connection between emotion and behaviour and just go directly to the emotion itself, how does it actually feel? If you knew with 100% certainty that no behaviour at all had to arise from an emotion, and you were free to simply feel the emotion as it is, right where it is, without changing it, without altering it, without modifying it, without even trying to heal it in any way or fix it, not trying to control or manipulate the emotion in any way, shape or form, is the emotion itself actually a problem? Now, we can obviously say, well, it's excruciatingly painful. Now, I've suffered terribly with anxiety, depression, and addiction. I know exactly just how painful they can be. But is it actually a problem in and of itself? Remember, we're taking behavior out of the equation here, just feeling an emotion itself. And we can recognize that, yes, uncomfortable, painful, but is it an issue? That's the first thing to just start understanding when it comes to shadow work. Emotion itself is not dangerous. You are free to feel it. Now, why do we use the word shadow to refer to this repressed, unconscious emotional material? It's actually one of those beautiful words, it actually sums it up incredibly well. If we think of consciousness as light, essentially anything that you are aware of is present in the light of consciousness, and anything that is immersed in light is not a shadow. So anything that you are conscious of is not a shadow, is not part of your shadow. The shadowy parts of yourselves are the unconscious parts of yourselves, the parts where the light of conscious awareness is not reaching. If you were to turn the light on in a room, wherever there are objects in the way, it blocks the light, and the shadow is cast behind that object. So when we're looking deeply and introspecting deeply into our emotional world, we become aware that there are areas that our consciousness is not reaching. It can't quite get to them. It's blocked. There is something in the way. Something in the way. I told you this might get quite uncomfortable, so buckle up, because here we go. So what is it that's in the way? Why can't we access? Why can we not access those emotions? We must remember that they are there. They are present. There is no such thing as somebody who doesn't have certain emotions. We all have all of them. This is another crucial point. We have to understand this when it comes to emotional health and well-being. We have to understand everyone has every emotion. It's a spectrum of emotion that we all have. It is not possible to be somebody who simply does not have anger. It's not possible to be somebody who doesn't have fear. It's not possible to be somebody who doesn't have guilt. It's simply not possible. What can happen is certain areas of our individual emotional spectrum get repressed, get avoided, or get resisted, and other areas may be overly accentuated, overly indulged in. And that's why each person presents with their individual expression of being to have what seems to be everyone has kind of different emotions or a different emotional world. But we have to understand at the heart, at the very heart of each human being, we all have all of the emotions. It's just that some areas are kind of knotted up, janked up for whatever reason through our life experiences and through our conditioning. It's just that, I guess we could say, like having a car that it keeps rattling, or there's areas of it, you know, if you've been driving a car for some time, it just kind of picks up these little quirks. You know that, you know, it doesn't turn left particularly well, and it makes a noise when you first start it up, and on long journeys something leaks or something like that. It's a little bit like that, just through the experiences and through our individual expression of being, through the conditioning that we receive. There are just areas that get repressed, resisted, and avoided. And now that emotional spectrum is not freely flowing, so to speak. So we have to look here, and this does get very sad and very dark, at the mechanism of repression. Why do we repress, resist, or avoid emotion? Well, when you first encountered these emotions, it was probably not safe to do so. And safety is a huge part of healing from deep, dark emotional wounds. We have to start feeling safe to feel these once again. When you first encountered certain emotions, let's say when you were a child, if you were angry and tried to express anger, you could have been met with anger in return by a parent or caregiver who are obviously huge and very frightening. And so, because when you tried to express this natural anger that any child has, you were probably met with either being told off, yelled at, shouted at, beaten, sent to your room, ignored, threatened, mocked, belittled, something along those lines. And because you received that conditioning, the message that gets sent to the child is that it's not safe to feel anger. Now, the human expression is so incredibly resourceful and so clever, so good at keeping itself safe, that in your inner world, you will have had a little conversation with yourself to say, right, anger, therefore, is bad. Not only is anger bad, it's actually dangerous. Because at the time you experienced it, it was dangerous. It was dangerous to express it when you were a child, because the parents, caregivers, even the teachers and the children around you, the entire culture was not conscious enough to be able to receive and field that anger. Particularly if you had very unconscious parents or caregivers. If they were not able, if they're very unconscious themselves and they're not able to adequately look after the emotional well-being of their child, there are certain emotions that they simply cannot process. They're too unconscious. They're too negative. They're too toxic to be able to provide adequate emotional care for their children. And so when their children start to express these certain emotions, the parents or caregivers respond with their own repression, essentially, and they just respond with very unconscious behaviors in response. So we looked a little there at anger. It's a very commonly repressed one. So what you do is you learn to repress, to bury that anger, and it gets buried somewhere in the body. And there are lots of behaviors that we then, unhealthy behaviors that we learn in order to stop showing our anger. But we have to understand that just because we stop showing it doesn't mean that it's gone anywhere. Unfortunately, the child had to hold on to that and swallow it and bury it. And, there's just so many very unhealthy behaviors that can result from that. So that's anger. A very common one that gets repressed is shame. It's usually when a child is emotionally neglected or abused in some way. So perhaps the child has the usual needs that a child has, and adequate care is not provided for them, and that could be physical, mental, emotional, just lots of ways that a children has needs, relies on the parents or caregivers for those needs to provide those needs. If the child doesn't receive adequate care in any of those areas, mental, physical, or emotional, the message that is sent to the child is that there is something wrong with you, that you are somehow defective, that you are not worthy of love, that you are not worthy of care. That's the message that the child receives and internalizes and buries. This was very true in my case. And I mean, even to this day, even as I'm speaking now, I can feel the emotions kind of rising up. I'm becoming very conscious of that and just seeking to integrate that as I'm speaking. This was very true in my case when it comes to repressed shame, and it was quite surprising for me actually to come across all of that material. Previously I thought, yeah, everything's fine, childhood was fine, everything's absolutely fine. I wasn't aware of just how much shame that I had repressed due to the emotional neglect that I received as a child. I'll speak on the effects of repressed shame in just a moment. So one little exercise that it can be quite good to do here is just reassess things, even if you thought, yep, everything was fine when I was a kid, yet no problems there at all. just assess certain areas of that, revisit that. Again, I know, uncomfortable, and maybe we don't really want to go there if we can possibly avoid it. But sometimes this is the best thing to do. Let's just bring some light to this, and come what may. You're better off with it out in the open, you know? Sometimes I liken it to if the bin is full in the kitchen and the kitchen stinks because the bin is full, there's no point just constantly spraying air freshener. We actually need to take the bin out at some point. So shame is quite a common one, and a lot of people aren't aware that actually their emotional needs when they were a child were just as important as their physical needs. It's not just about the food and shelter. It's actually that a child needs love. It's not that a child wants love. It's that a child needs love. And if the child doesn't receive love, it's like a kind of emotional malnutrition. If you didn't feed a child physical food, they're going to be malnourished. And if you don't give a child love that a child needs love, then it will be emotionally malnourished. And this emotional neglect has a profoundly powerful negative impact on the child's self-image, the way they perceive themselves, and the way they perceive the world. So there's a little about sort of like anger, rage, and shame. I mean, the repressed shame, as we're on the subject. Thanks for listening, by the way. What do I owe you for this session? It's also, it's not even that sometimes people think of things like emotional neglect or abuse, misuse as misuse? No, that's wrong. Emotional abuse. As just being yelled at, or even, just being kind of mocked or belittled or things like that. But it's also just if the child is ignored, if the child is trying to express their skills and their talents and their passions and their joy and their happiness, and that's not validated, it's not received with love, it's not received with appreciation, it's not received with any gratitude, this all leads to repressed shame, absolutely. So there we are beginning to understand how the mechanism of this repression begins in the first place. It's simply that it's too painful. This is the thing to understand. When you're a child, you don't have the understanding, the knowledge, the power, or the resources in order to properly process what's happening. And this is why your whole being is very intelligent, and when it sees something that it's not able to process, and the child becomes aware that the adults around the child are somewhat incompetent in certain areas, the child knows this. Children are so clever, so intuitive, so emotionally switched on, they can tell when there's something off about the adults around them. And so what happens is you take certain emotions, especially the kind of the unloved sort of feeling, or you take that dangerous feeling rage, you take that dangerous feeling shame, guilt, and regret, and you store it in the body as a kind of a way of putting it on the later base, so to speak, to say, right, well, we can't deal with this right now because it's not safe to do so. So we'll bury it somewhere, and then we'll dig it out later. We'll process this when the time is right for us to process this. And hey, that's where we're at today. That's what we're doing right now. It's time to let it out. It's time to bring it up out into the light of consciousness. And we have to understand just how powerful consciousness really is, that it can bury something for so long. It can happen, you could go decades, you could go absolutely decades never coming back into contact with this material. But sooner or later, it's going to happen. Sooner or later, it is inevitable. Whether we choose to, whether just through, maybe we take a look at our lives, so we start engaging with therapy or something along those lines, and that's how we start to become aware of how these early experiences have affected us. Or sometimes it's due to something that happens in life. Maybe certain emotions are triggered by major life events such as a breakup, a loss of health, a catastrophe of some sort, or just something comes to light. There's just some triggering event that means we can't hide from it anymore, and it just brings it up to the surface. So that's how this repressed material can suddenly erupt into our minds. Happens all the time. But it's better to approach this repressed material kind of gently and with love and compassion, and the more we can do that, the more it's not going to blindside us if it just arises suddenly out of nowhere. So that's the mechanism. That's why it happens and how it happens, and there has to be an element of don't beat yourself up about this, because this happens quite often as well. We often, when we look at this material, this was true in my case, absolutely, when I saw how much repressed anger, repressed shame, and repressed grief was there, I was like, how did I not see this before? It's so obvious. And we can lead to a kind of we're baffled how we couldn't see it before. We might even start being hard on ourselves for not seeing it before. But we have to understand that actually that inner child did so well to do what it needed to do in order to keep itself safe. And there may have been certain behaviours that were not particularly helpful or healthy either, but we have to recognise a child can only do what the child can do based on the knowledge and resources that it has. And if burying certain emotions was the right thing to do at the time, then it was the right thing to do. That you did the best you could with what you had. And there's almost a sense of being grateful to your own inner child here. Be grateful and be appreciative and understanding of why certain things got repressed and buried in the first place. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You did the right thing. Now we're in a position where we do have resources. We do have the emotional resilience. We do have the knowledge and hopefully the support as well in order to come back into contact with this repressed emotional material. And now is the time to do so, because we can recognize that the previous way of doing things isn't helping. It's served its purpose, and now it's time to let it all go. It's time to find a different way forwards, and that's why we do shadow work. It's to become emotionally safe to feel all of our emotions, and this can help us to develop in a kind of emotional maturity that really we should have had all along. This is the emotional maturity that should have been taught to us that we were never taught. It's the emotional maturity and just general maturity that should have been modelled to us by the adults around us when we were young, the parents and caregivers. If they didn't model this emotional maturity, and if you just take a look at it and think, well, did they model good relationships? Did they model emotional health? Did they model mental health? Were they mature, healthy people around you when you were growing up, or was it something else? Yeah. So what we tend to do sort of through that shadow work, it's almost, sometimes it's termed as like a reparenting kind of discipline, where we're just teaching ourselves the things that we should have known all along. But don't beat yourself up about everything that you've done thus far either, because you did what you didn't know any better. And if you don't know any better, you can only act on the information that you have at the time and the resources that you have at the time. And if you think of the resources and information that a child has It's not a lot. It's not a lot. So you did the best you could with what you had. So that's the mechanism of why we repress, avoid, or resist. Now we're going to take a little look at why it's important to bring these shadowy parts of ourselves out by taking a look at what some of the effects of these repressed emotions can be in our everyday life in the present. So we repressed them at some point in that shadowy past, but these things are still living within us today, and they show up in our lives, our thoughts, our behaviors, our decisions, our emotional health, our mood. It shows up every single day of our lives. As briefly mentioned before, when we bring ourselves fully into the present moment, into the here and now, we are not saying that the past never happened. It's actually worse than that. What we're saying is the past lives on in you now. It never went anywhere. It's still happening. It's still happening now. So we're going to take a look at what some of the effects in the present that repressed emotion can have on us. Again, similar to how if you don't take the bin out in the kitchen, it's going to start stinking, and we need to empty the bin, not just spray the air freshener. Some of these effects can be seen of as the stink of a buried emotion. So we're going to look at 3 examples of repressed emotion. We're going to look at repressed shame, repressed rage, and repressed grief. I'm most often using the term repressed, but we have to understand that this can also mean avoided or resisted. So repressed tends to mean like buried and pushed down, but it's also just as possible that we just find ways to avoid emotion, and usually we do that by trying to distract ourselves in some way. And we also resist emotion, which is just maybe a kind of like bracing yourself constantly to kind of mitigate the pain of the impact of this emotion. So in general, I use the term repressed, and we'll use that as the term, but understand repressed can also mean avoided and resisted. Repressed shame. So shame is the feeling, when it's in its healthy position, shame is just a feeling that you've done something wrong, that you behaved in a way that is not good, that is not healthy, and especially in the social kind of context, the social setting. So in its healthy form, shame can actually be very useful for us. It can be very helpful for us, because if you do something and feel ashamed of it, you're likely to not do it again, provided that this is healthy. We're doing so in a healthy way. Very small amount of shame is just, well, I did something that I'm not very proud of, and I'll endeavour to not do that again. And then that's it. That's the absolute end of it. There's no further need for any analysis beyond that. That's when shame is in its healthy position within that emotional spectrum. But when shame is repressed, and particularly if you received a lot of shaming messages when you were a child or at some point in your experience, what this develops is an unconscious belief that there is something inherently wrong with you, that you are somehow sick. And this unconscious belief actually shows up in many different ways in our culture, particularly in this obsession that everything is genetic, that when we have like flaws or problems that we need to address and work on, one of our go-to kind of beliefs is, well, it's just genetic, or it's just the way that I am. That's just how I am. There's just something wrong with me. Another way is brain chemistry. People are quite fond of saying it's, I've just got a brain chemistry sort of thing. That is actually repressed shame. That's what that is. That is repressed shame showing up in our cultural psyche. There's just an obsession with things being genetic. And a lot of people are self-diagnosing themselves with all kinds of perceptive disorders, learning disorders, lots of self-diagnosis, because a lot of people don't realize they have repressed shame within them. And this repressed shame is giving rise to a belief that there is something, that you're sick in some way, that there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. Okay? Surprise. Surprise. I don't know if anyone's ever said that to you before, but there is nothing wrong with you. You're just fine. You are beautiful and wonderful just as you are. You are unique in your expression of being, and your skills and talents and passions and things you're interested in, your way of perceiving the world, your inherent way of being is marvelous. Marvelous. The universe loves to see it and cannot wait to see what you do next. The universe waits to delight in you. You are just fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. But so many people have such a deeply repressed shame that they simply cannot allow themselves to believe that. They believe that they are sick. Born sick and commanded to be well. That's a religious way of putting it. You know, original sin is how they would term that in religious terminology. And in more modern scientific terminology, they would say it's a genetic problem. You have an inherent kind of disease of some sort. You don't. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. There's nothing wrong with your brain chemistry. Nothing wrong with you whatsoever. So that's one of the ways that repressed shame shows up in our general cultural psyche. It's there. It's very prevalent. You see a lot of self-diagnosis, and you see a lot of inherent belief that there's just something off with you. It also shows up as imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you kind of feel like you're faking it. Like everyone else kind of gets it, but you're kind of faking it. And even you find this even in people that are like doctors. They've done all of the degrees and everything, and they're performing as a doctor and doing a really good job of it as well. And yet every single day they go into work feeling like they're kind of faking it somehow. Like this is all a show, it's all an act. And any day now people are going to find out that I'm not really a doctor. I'm just some idiot that somehow managed to get hold of a medical degree. It's a very prevalent feeling, and doctor's just one example there, but many people just feel it in their work life, even in relationships. You feel like you're just kind of faking it, and at some point you're going to get found out. It's a horrible feeling. And the root of that is repressed shame. Feeling like an imposter. Feeling like you don't belong. That's another one. That's another very common one. Do you, listen, do you feel like an alien walking around on planet Earth? Do you feel like everyone else gets it, but you don't? That you missed the day at school where people got taught how to be normal, that everyone else seems to be functioning just fine, but there's something in you that is just, you feel like you don't fit in wherever you go. You feel like you don't belong. I, a stranger and afraid in a world I never made. Feeling like you just, no matter what you do, you simply cannot get what everybody else gets. That is most likely repressed shame. Because at some point in your experience, in your early life, you were given the message that there's something wrong with you. Now, surprise, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with the care that you were given. You should have been loved unconditionally. And that so often doesn't happen. There's nothing wrong with you. There was something wrong with them. So, one of the ways that it showed up for me in my experience is that actually, I didn't realize this, but my anxiety was actually caused by repressed shame. Now, you might think, what's the link between anxiety and repressed shame? How can something like shame result in fear? Well, if you're carrying an inherent belief that there's something wrong with you, life seems terrifying because you don't feel like you're equipped to cope with the normal challenges and stresses of everyday life. And if you feel like there's something inherently wrong with you, naturally you're going to be hyper vigilant. You're going to be constantly terrified of any event arising because you feel like you're not going to be able to deal with what's going to happen. So that is one potential cause of anxiety. It's one way in which it shows up in life. Often when it comes to anxiety, we just say, oh, well, it's just brain chemistry. And you'll notice particularly lazy and unconscious parents just like to medicate their children by saying, well, it's just something wrong with their brain chemistry, rather than taking a look at themselves, rather than taking a look at their own behaviours and thinking, well, I wonder if it's my behaviours that are causing my child's anxiety. There's tragically few parents that look at the task of parenting in that way, but they should. We're also going to look here at repressed rage. Repressed rage. Now, a lot of people will say, I just don't feel angry. I'm not a very angry person. Now, if you want to start doing some of this shadow work and start bringing some of this unconscious material to light, then here's what we're going to start doing here. It's a very useful little exercise. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to speak through repressed rage, repressed grief, and then we're going to get into how to actually do this shadow work with some practical exercises that we can do. But the first little exercise here is to just do some deep introspection. And we can already do this. Let's just start breathing and just opening the entirety of our being to conscious awareness, just being very conscious of our present experience, and in particular becoming very conscious of our emotional world, the current emotional state, and our general emotional state from day to day. And just ask yourself, are there any emotions that you simply don't feel? There's just certain emotions you just never really seem to feel, you never really seem to come into contact with. And just become very aware of this. I mean, often when we're kind of assessing ourselves and thinking about our personalities and thinking about who we are as people, there's an element of just recognizing, so what's my usual kind of emotional state? How am I emotionally speaking? And just seeing if there's any areas where you'd say, yeah, I just never really feel a certain emotion. A very common answer to that question is anger. People say, I just never really feel angry. Now, this is potentially quite upsetting, but if you never feel an emotion, that doesn't mean that you don't have that emotion. It means that it's repressed. Everybody has every emotion. Everybody has the entire emotional spectrum. And if you don't feel a certain emotion, I'm sorry to inform you, but that is not healthy. It's not. In the same way that if there was a part of your body that was continually numb, that you were constantly numb in a certain area, that does not mean that area is healthy. It's not a sign that things are functioning well. If you went to a doctor and said, look, I just have no feeling in my left arm. I've got feeling everywhere else, but I've got no feeling whatsoever in my left arm. The doctor wouldn't say, oh, well, that's all right then. That's good. If you've got no feeling there, you're completely numb in a certain area, then I guess everything's fine. If a doctor heard that you were completely numb in your left arm, they'd be very concerned. They'd be very worried that there's something going on deep down, something going on that needs some attention. So just as physical numbness in the body is not an indication of physical health and could actually be a sign that something is off, the same is true for emotions and emotional health. If you are emotionally numb in a certain area of the emotional spectrum, it's not a sign that that area is healthy and could be a sign that something is off. So, as an entry point into shadow work here, this can be a very powerful, very insightful area to begin looking at, because we often have a fair understanding of how we are as people, and just thinking about your own personality and your own day-to-day emotional world. Are there any areas of your emotional spectrum that you just don't really feel? It's just kind of hard to reach that area with your conscious awareness. It's just very difficult to bring that emotion into your conscious awareness of experience in your daily life. Anger is a very commonly repressed emotion, and I'll just give an example of how this can happen. Let's say when you're a young child, you come downstairs one morning and find that your parents or caregivers have thrown all of your toys in the bin. Not for any particular reason, they wanted to declutter, they wanted a nice tidy house, and they decided on a whim that they're just going to put your toys in the bin. Naturally, you get very angry, you're very upset by this, and being a child, you demonstrate all of those behaviours by being tearful, shouting, throwing a tantrum, because naturally you're a child and that's what children do. And this angry behaviour is met by getting slapped and sent to your room and told that it's not appropriate to feel anger. You shouldn't feel angry, and being angry is bad, and you should be more grateful, and things along those lines. Very damaging, very toxic. Now, on top of that, not just that, because you have then learnt incorrectly as a child that anger is not safe, you then start trying to demonstrate that you don't get angry. So even when terrible injustices are done against you and there are massive gaps in the care that you're receiving as a child, you continually demonstrate that you're not angry. You go out of your way to try and show your parents and caregivers that you are not angry, and you will get praised for doing so, because you're demonstrating compliance that makes your parents and caregivers' lives a lot easier, and so they praise this behaviour. This is conditioning. It's like simple Pavlovian conditioning, really. When you're making your parents' life easier, they praise you. If you're slightly difficult in any way, shape or form, they meet it with unreasonably intense emotional reactions and demonstrate this terribly emotionally immature way of being. Poor modelling. So you're praised for not showing anger, and you're punished when you do show anger, despite the fact that the anger is absolutely justified. And we have to understand that anger is a healthy emotion. Anger is the emotion of boundaries. Anger is the emotion of standing up against injustice. Anger is the emotion of ensuring that you and the people you care about are treated fairly and correctly. But this anger is often punished when it was inconvenient for the adults around you when you're a child. School is like this as well. It's not just then at home, it's also at school. You are simply not permitted to ever show any level of anger. And you're praised for burying your anger, for biting your tongue, and for repressing it. So a lot of us are walking around with a lot of repressed rage. A lot of it. And it's very telling if somebody ever kind of has this belief that, well, I'm just not an angry person, and goes out of their way to demonstrate that they're very calm, very peaceful, and they never really get angry. Unfortunately, we have to get in touch with this rage if we seek to become emotionally and mentally healthy. Some of the ways that repressed rage can show up in our daily life is passive aggression. Passive aggression. So you might notice this in a lot of people when they're never outwardly angry, but they make lots of nasty, underhanded comments. It's quite common in cases of repressed anger. The anger's got to come out somewhere, and if we've repressed it, it tends to come out as passive aggression, acts of kind of cold, calculated sabotage almost, or just little nasty comments that are not very overt but are very subtle perhaps underhanded, manipulative. Repressed rage can also show up as just irritability and increased levels of stress. It's just like we're trying to kind of push down and hold down a volcano at all times that's just waiting to try and erupt out onto the surface, but we never let it do so. And this can cause a huge amount of stress, huge amount of irritability. Another one that is commonly repressed and very few people are aware of it is grief. Grief. A lot of us are unaware that we have never allowed ourselves to grieve for things that we've lost in the past. And we often think, but I haven't lost anyone. I've not suffered a bereavement, so there's nothing to grieve. But that's not really how grief works. Grief is the emotion of loss. And we could grieve for past relationships. We need to grieve when we have breakups. We need to grieve when there are massive changes in our circumstances. Any time we're in a period of loss, grief is necessary in order to process the loss in a healthy way. Now, it's also the case that massive change is very similar to loss, and so similar to loss that grief is necessary. So if there was a lot of moving house when you were younger, you were moving areas, there will be a lot of repressed grief. And you were probably never allowed to express or feel that grief because moving house is what your parents wanted to do. They just wanted to move house constantly for whatever reason. Or you had to change schools often. You may never have been able to come into contact with the level of grief that was necessary. And this isn't just a childhood one. This is also then, as we come into adulthood, maybe you have relationships that don't work out and you have to move on, or there are jobs that you were enjoying, but maybe you need to move on from that job for whatever reason. Life is change. Everything is changing constantly. And sometimes those changes are so massive that it's akin to experiencing loss. And yet we don't really recognize it as loss when it's a change. And yet it is a loss. I mean, I find it quite interesting when I look at, if you take, for example, now, the person you were 5 years ago, that person, the way they were, the way they thought, the way they behaved, their life circumstances, where is that person now? Are you the same person? Or has there been massive change since then? And yet we don't really grieve the loss of that person, despite the fact that person is not there anymore. I just find that very interesting. Repressed grief can show up as just unexplained sadness. You just feel very sad. I think there's a lot of people who believe they're suffering from depression, but what they're actually experiencing is grief. But because they don't know to call it grief, they experience it as depression and not as grief. That's one of my personal theories as to why there can be a lot of depression in someone's life and they never quite understand what's happening there. It could be grief. Just get back in contact with grief. Grief's one of the hardest ones to initiate contact with, but once it begins, there's no stopping it. It's like the floodgates open. And although that can be very uncomfortable, it's also a remarkable relief. It's a huge relief when you finally allow yourself to grieve. And something I'd invite anyone to do if they are looking at their mental and emotional health is to ask yourself, what am I refusing to grieve? What am I refusing to grieve? Is there anything that I am trying my hardest not to grieve? And you can also grieve for the things that should have been. It's quite a difficult one to kind of get your head around, but We are in the realm of emotion here. This is not the realm of logic. This is not the realm of rationality. This is the realm of emotion. It has its own life energy. It has its own way of being, and grief is just like this. Sometimes we have to grieve for the things that could have been. You have to grieve for the childhood you could have had. You have to grieve for the relationships you could have had. Maybe you had a relationship that you realise wasn't what you thought it was, but you still have to grieve for what it could have been. You have to grieve all of the missed opportunities. You have to grieve for how things could have been thus far. And it's through this process of grief that we allow ourselves to work through that deeper, darker sadness, and by doing so, that sets the scene for moving on, for moving into a new life. We have to let go of the old in order to move into the new, but in order to let go of the old, we must be willing to grieve. So that repressed grief can show up as unexplained sadness. It could also show up as indecisiveness, because if we're not able to process change and loss, it can be very difficult to let go of things. It can be very difficult to make decisions, big decisions necessary in order to improve and change our life circumstance, because we're not equipped to deal with massive change and massive loss, because we were never shown how to do it and we never learned how to do it. But now is the time to learn how to do it. Grief's a big one. It really is. And yeah, I had to come into contact with a lot of grief, and still do to this day. I set time aside each day to ensure that I'm in contact with my own grief and just sadness. This is the practice of emotion work that we're going to be getting into now. So I've spoken a lot here about the mechanism of how emotions get repressed in the first place, how those repressed emotions then show up in our daily life, just to give an idea of why it's important to do this work. And hey, if we if we can really get to grips with this, if we can really learn how to do this, you will finally be in contact with that thing that's been bugging you all along, that's been following you around all along. I mean, have you ever felt this? Have you been doing your therapy? You've been learning. You've been reading all of the books, watching the videos, listening to the talks, engaging with the professional services, and although they seem helpful, and they are helpful, phenomenally helpful, they are good, they are healthy, powerful, profound, do you ever feel like there's just something that's not quite right? You're just not quite getting there. You're just not quite getting to the root of the root. Have you ever felt that? I have. I knew when I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy, I knew, well, this is helpful, this is good, but there's something I'm just not quite getting. No matter what I did with my physical training and exercise, all of my meditation, talking therapies, reading the self-help books, I just felt like there was something not quite resolved, not quite addressed. And it wasn't until I learned shadow work that I knew. Now, it's the most painful thing that I've ever done, but it's also there was a huge relief when I realized, now we are at the root of the root. Now, all of those other things took me to that. Right? I needed to do the cognitive behavioral therapy, the physical exercise, the meditation. I needed to stop drinking. I needed to do all of that in order to be able to do the shadow work in the first place. So it's not to say that, if only I'd done shadow work first, then the rest of it wouldn't have been necessary. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work that way around. I needed to do all of that to become strong enough, resilient enough, resourced enough, and informed enough to be able to do this work at all. So, That's a little bit on how it happens in the first place, why it's a good idea to do it, and how it shows up in our daily life. Now we're going to look at how to actually do shadow work in the first place. How to actually practically apply these principles and practices so that we can become acutely aware of the deeply repressed parts of ourselves, that we can bring the full light of conscious awareness to the shadow. And by doing so, we can make ourselves safe, emotionally safe from these deep, dark parts of ourselves. As we're reaching the halfway mark here, if you are listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Sorry to ask, but it makes a remarkable difference in growing the channel and helping me to get my work out there, so I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you're listening on Spotify, why not check out my YouTube channel? I have a lot of guided meditations on there, talks about spiritual practices, meditative principles, advice on overcoming addiction, and general advice on health and fitness. You might find some of the material on my YouTube channel useful. Thank you so much. So here we start to come into how to actually do shadow work, how to actually get deeply into the emotion work right here. Some basic principles. Ultimately, we are trying to bring this emotional material into the light of conscious awareness, and we do so by ensuring that the emotion itself feels safe. It feels like it's okay to come out of its hiding place. If you imagine a frightened or scared animal that's hiding away in a cave, it's a case of providing a safe area in which the animal feels as though it can tentatively begin to just come out of where it's been hiding. And what this does is it just allows the emotion to come up and out, just gently, slowly, and gradually. And by doing so, by having its time in the light of awareness, it feels comfortable to actually reside in the space that it always should have been residing. It's as though a lot of these deeper emotions that we're ordinarily unconscious of have kind of been put in the wrong place. We kind of pushed them aside or buried and repressed them, and they didn't have the opportunity to be felt as they should have been felt when they were first encountered. And so all we're doing now is just allowing your natural, healthy emotions back up into the light of awareness, and you will notice that they resolve themselves. There's one very powerful analogy that a repressed emotion is almost like a coiled snake, like a tightly knotted up coiled snake, and it knows how to unfurl itself. And this is how emotion is. It knows already how to resolve itself. It's just a case of taking the mind out of the equation, because it's the mind that does the judging. It's the mind that does the analyzing. It's the mind that is constantly trying to assess for threats and to interpret everything, to name everything, to label everything. It's the mind that tries to decide whether something is right or wrong. But there are no wrong emotions. Emotion itself is perfectly healthy. We need to just give the mind a rest. Just let the mind fall away and feel the emotion itself raw. with no narrative around it, no cognitive energy put onto it in an attempt to constrain it, in an attempt to change it. We're just going to bring full, unconditional love to the emotion itself, and the mind can take a break. The mind has been working overtime since you were very young to constantly assess if emotions are safe or not, to be very vigilant to the emotional world, to constantly try and force yourself to behave in certain ways, to try and force emotion to behave in certain ways, to decide, no, we can't feel that right now, or it's not appropriate to feel that right now. This is all the activity of the mind, and it's time to just let the mind rest, let the mind fall completely dormant, and instead just applying conscious awareness only to the emotion itself. This will feel very paradoxical and very counterintuitive. We often think that in order to heal an emotion, we need to find a way to not feel it, or we need to find a way to make the emotion comfortable. But that's not the case. That's not what we're doing here. What we're actually doing here is we are inviting the emotion up, and the task here is to feel it as intensely as possible. Counterintuitive. This is paradoxical. It's amazing, I know. It sounds like that wouldn't work. Surely that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. But the mechanism here by which this works is that by feeling it fully, accepting it fully, by applying love to it, which is to say, you're okay just as you are. You don't need to change. To say, I love you, to the emotion itself, and say, you can be here. You don't need to be different here. And just, it's the willingness to feel it in its raw, full intensity that then demonstrates to us that it is safe to feel it. Remember, no behaviour needs to arise out of this emotion. None at all. All we're doing is simply saying to the emotion, it is fine for you to come into the light of awareness and be exactly as you are. To say thank you to the emotion. Thank you for being there. Emotions guide us. Emotions provide us with intuition and insight. Emotions tell us where to go, what to do, and who to be around in our lives, regardless of the emotion, whether it's fear, guilt, regret, shame, anger, all of them. These are all remarkably useful elements of our experience, and we must get comfortable with feeling all of them if we are to enjoy peace, happiness, serenity, and fulfillment. No more repressing, no more avoiding, no more resisting, just allowing, loving. These are deep parts of yourself, inherent parts of yourself, primal parts of yourself, intimate parts of yourself. They are perfectly healthy. They were never wrong. Your emotions were never wrong. There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with any part of you. All of you is marvellous. So, by inviting the emotion into the field of awareness, by saying it is absolutely safe and okay for you to come out now, and to just feel it, There's some things that we have to understand here. Firstly, not many people know this, but all mind activity happens after the emotion. Due to the way that we ordinarily perceive things, it feels as though we have mind activity and then we feel an emotion as a result of the mind activity. For example, a memory may arise in the mind. Let's say you remember an email you received last week from your boss and it really annoyed you. Suddenly that memory comes to mind and then you feel angry. What is happening in reality is that in the present moment, anger is trying to rise to the surface, and so your mind finds the nearest memory that resonates with that emotion. Kind of like how if you have two tuning forks and you bang one tuning fork so it makes its ringing noise, and you hold it next to the other tuning fork, the other tuning fork begins to resonate with the vibration of the other tuning fork, the one that you struck. It's exactly the same when it comes to mind activity, how it relates to emotion. The emotion is there first. This is crucial. This is crucial. If you think, again, I've used the analogy, and it's very apt, of the kitchen bin. It's filled with waste food and now stinks because it's all rotting away. And you can smell in the kitchen that it stinks. The mind activity is the smell. The kitchen bin is the repressed emotion, which is to say it's the vapour. I like to use the analogy of vapour. Mind activity relating to emotion is like a vapour that is evaporating off of the deeply repressed emotion. Why is this important? This explains why you never quite feel like you're getting to the root of the problem when you are trying to deal with emotional issues on the level of the mind. When you're dealing with emotional issues on the level of narratives, memories, words, and thoughts, including mental images, what we are dealing with is the vapour. We are dealing with the smell. We are spraying air freshener when we should be taking out the bin. Which, again, it's not to say there's anything wrong with doing that. Those are good things, and they help us to isolate where the smell is coming from. So that's how they can be very useful, these practices of engaging emotion on the level of the mind. Because by the nature of the smell, let's say, I don't know, it stinks of fish, then you think, oh yeah, because I threw out that, I threw out half of that fish dinner I had. And then you think, oh, well, now I know where the smell is coming from. It's coming from the bin. It's exactly the same. So if you're on the level of the mind, you're aware of a lot of angry thoughts and a lot of memories that are making you feel angry, now you know that on a deep level there's probably some repressed rage. There's probably some repressed rage, and we can use many different examples for this. If your thoughts are very sad and there's a lot of sad images in the mind, we know there might be some repressed sadness or grief that's going on just underneath the surface. We have to understand this because when we come into shadow work, and let's say you just sit and you take some intentional time to just start trying to apply that inner love to shine the light of unconditional love inwards to the deep parts of your emotional self, you have to understand that there is going to be a lot, and I mean a lot, of very intense mind activity that will inevitably rise during this practice. It is crucial that you do not engage with the mind. Engaging with the mind is further avoidance of the emotion. For example, you're deep in your shadow work and come across a very, very sad, powerful sense of grief, and a lot of emotions get stuck together when they're repressed. So you might have like grief tied up with rage, tied up with fear, tied up with shame. And because you're coming into contact with this, your mind will naturally snap into its usual protective mechanisms. and it will race off up into the mind. And often you might just have very angry thoughts, like you might replay certain arguments, you might replay memories over and over again. You might get caught up in thinking, a very common one is, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that. When I see this person next, I'm going to do this, I'm going to say that. If this happens again, I'm going to say this. These are all narratives. All of this cognitive activity, it has its place, but during shadow work, focus only on the emotion. Do not go up into the mind. This is challenging, and this is why it's work. The work here is retraining the habit of where your attention goes. Our usual habit is the moment we feel the emotion, we go up into the head and engage in our usual mechanism of repression, resistance, and avoidance. But we are retraining the habit now, and this is the benefit of doing this shadow work, this emotion work. Do not allow yourself to go to the mind. We have gone to the mind for long enough. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked thus far, and it's not going to work. No amount of air freshener will take out the bin. You could empty can after can of air freshener into the bin itself. It's not going to fix the problem. So how do we fix the problem? Bring the light of conscious awareness to the emotion, and instead of going to the mind, just go to love. Love. I know love is a difficult word. It's a difficult word for me to even use. It's tough. I don't like speaking on it with using the term love, because it feels kind of overly sweet. It feels kind of sappy. I don't know. I don't know why that is, but it's, if we understand what love is, it's unconditional acceptance. Love is saying, you are okay just as you are. I don't need you to change. I don't need you to go away. I don't need you to be different. I don't need you to behave differently. That's what you're going to say to your emotions, even the ones that feel the most abhorrent to you. This is why this has been so difficult to get to this point, because these emotions feel dangerous. They feel sickening. They feel wrong. There are no wrong emotions. It's not possible. It's not possible to have a wrong emotion. The universe does not make mistakes. The universe doesn't make mistakes. All parts of you have been pre-accepted. All parts of you have been pre-allowed. If they weren't pre-allowed, they wouldn't be here. Just the virtue of the fact that they are here, that they are present, is proof that they belong here. They are already here. You are not creating these emotions. They are already here. So, there is a remarkable relief to this, despite the fact that there may be an element of dread as you're beginning to feel where we're about to go, right? But stay with me, because the mind is going to go, oh yes, well, this all sounds very, very good, but maybe we'll do it later, or maybe it's not the right time now, or maybe I'll do it at the weekend. I can't possibly do any of this shadow work whilst I'm driving, or whilst it's the middle of the day, or whilst blah, 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 blah. That's the mind. That is the mind engaged in its usual habit of avoiding the deeper emotional material. When we become totally accepting with a profound, radical, dare I say, fanatical level of acceptance, to say all emotion is perfect as it is, I am willing to feel it, suddenly we don't need to go to the mind. This mind activity just falls silent. It falls completely silent. Why does it do that? because it's not necessary anymore. You've given the mind its retirement, essentially, on this area. You say, thanks, mind, you've done a great job thus far, but we've got a different way of dealing with things now. You can even say this to your inner child. Say, thank you. Thanks for doing everything you did. You repressed everything exactly as you should have done. You resisted, you avoided, you kept yourself safe. You kept us safe. Thank you. But there's another way now. You say, I'm going to take charge now. I'm the adult. I am well-resourced. I am equipped. I am informed. I have support. So I'm going to take the reins now. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to allow. Allow, allow, allow. Thank you, emotion. Please, please come into the light of awareness. I want to feel this. I need to feel this. I'm glad it's here. When the mind goes quiet, you realize that you don't suffer from the emotion. We suffer in our mind. We don't suffer in reality. So when you are able to simply feel the emotion without any mind activity around it, without any mind activity trying to constrain it, change it, modify it, fix it, move it somewhere, push it away, keep it down, bring it up, like all of that. When we don't have that going on, we find that we don't suffer the emotion. The emotion itself is just fine. Just fine. And wow, is that a relief. My God. All this time running, all this time fighting, it's time to rest, and rest within the emotion itself. This may be a process, it might take a lot of energy, it might take some clock time, it might take all of this. That's fine, that's fine. We know this is the most profound, powerful work that it's possible to do. All is well. This has such a remarkable impact on our mental, emotional, and even our physical health. I mean, previously, when I had the repressed shame that was leading to a lot of anxiety, I was self-medicating through my binge eating and my addiction to alcohol. By engaging in those behaviors, it was like a self-soothing, that sort of tightened up, very intense kind of nervous system activity. When you consume substances that soothe that nervous system, then you feel okay, you feel normal. So that's the mechanism of self-medication, self-soothing. But by bringing the light of conscious awareness to recognizing that emotion is fine just as it is, perfectly safe, perfectly healthy, and you develop this sense of emotional safety as you no longer feel afraid of your emotions. You no longer feel afraid or avoidant of any of your deeper emotional world. There's just an automatic reaction. The moment an emotion wants to rise to the surface, we automatically just go straight to love, straight to acceptance, straight to allowing, straight to allowing. You can allow yourself to feel upset, allow yourself to feel sad, allow yourself to feel worried, allow yourself to feel angry, and just trust. Trust the emotion. All is well. Now, there are levels to this practice. I'd like to just share 3 practical techniques that we can do. And you might find that all 3 of them work perfectly for you straight away. You might find that, especially in the case of if this has been going on for a long time and you have quite intense issues with your mental and emotional health, it may take a little while to get the benefit out of all of these practices, and you might find that doing this in a step-by-step process works better for you. I mean, it might even be the case that everything discussed thus far might be a fair starting point. Just process and digest this before actually moving to a more formal practice. So the first exercise here, a little technique for just beginning to develop an accurate inner awareness of your emotional self, is simply to ask yourself the question, what am I actually feeling? This sounds so simple, it's almost patronizing. I know that. It sounds too simple, and often we might think, what am I actually feeling? And our initial response is, well, it's obvious. I know exactly what I'm feeling. I just am feeling what I'm feeling. But look again. Look again. This is a very powerful question that you can ask yourself on a day-to-day basis, often throughout your life. Simply, what am I actually feeling? Let's take the example that you're just having a bad day. It's just a difficult day at work, and you're just feeling awful that day. Maybe you woke up feeling awful. You just cannot quite put your finger on it, and you just feel, God, you often hear this sentiment. People will actually just say it. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I just feel off today. I feel weird. I feel bad. It's just don't feel right today. That's a common one. Just don't feel right. Okay, that's a good starting point. But what if we didn't allow ourselves to just say, I feel awful, or I feel bad, or I don't feel right, or I feel off? And instead, we ask ourselves the question, what am I actually feeling? And don't let yourself off the hook until you have a very clear, defined answer. This is a transformative question, particularly for just how simple it is. And it's so powerful because it can be done anywhere at any time. You don't need to take yourself off to a room somewhere or spend an hour in meditation in order to ask this question. You can do it in the middle of a busy working day, driving to and from work, whilst looking after kids, whilst doing your food shop, whatever, whenever. It's just a very grounding exercise to just check in, just breathe. Just bring your awareness fully into the present moment, and just an awareness, just trying to define the edges of the emotion you're currently feeling. Now, don't beat yourself up if you don't get a clear answer right away. There's no pressure. We need to release ourselves from the burden of pressuring ourselves to really understand certain things immediately and do things rapidly. There's no such thing as time, so there is no pressure. Instead, it's just a level of sincerity and a level of intention, just saying, I want to know exactly what it is that I'm feeling, and that developing the inner ear by just being so open and so accepting and so allowing that we can say, whatever it is that wants to be seen now, just you're safe to be seen. What actually is this emotion? You can recognize that there is something in the inner world that wants to be recognized. It wants to be seen. That's why you're feeling it. That's why you're feeling off that day. That's why you're feeling a bit janky. That's why you're feeling tense, agitated, restless. It's most likely that there is something deep in the inner world that's trying to come up, but your automatic mechanisms of repression are pushing it down. And that's what's giving rise to this feeling of being off, feeling tense, nervous, or agitated. So what if we just let go of all that mechanism of any repression or avoidance? Just no avoidance necessary. Just feel it. Just feel it. What's actually here? And it's often surprising. Allow yourself to be surprised. Allow yourself to start being surprised. The freedom to say, I didn't know that. Let yourself off the hook a bit there. Just like, oh, I didn't realise. Wow, that's so interesting. And not admonishing yourself for not seeing it sooner. That's all part of the repression. Is to beat ourselves up is part of the repression, part of the avoidance. And we're not going to go to any of that. Instead, it's just, that's so interesting. I mean, I like to give practical examples in the modern world where possible. And from my experience just yesterday, I had my car in for its MOT, and it failed, by the way. So I was going to take some money to get it sorted. And it took a long time yesterday for them to kind of do all their checks and servicing and all of that. And all day I had to be very aware of my inner world. I'm just saying, so there was frustration and there was disappointment and it was difficult. I just had to recognise that this was quite a tough day emotionally, rather than going to my usual habitual mechanisms of repression, which is to just say everything's fine, I'm not affected by anything, just trying to put a positive spin on everything. Well, those things are all good surface level, but this is when the emotion work, the shadow work, actually kicks in a practical setting in our everyday life to improve our mental health and well-being. It's because all day yesterday I was asking myself, what am I actually feeling? And I felt nervous, I felt a bit frustrated, I felt disappointed when it failed. There were lots of strong emotions there. Your vehicle is kind of tied up in your livelihood and your functioning in life. So obviously there's going to be some emotions tied up. And that's going to go right back to childhood in terms of our beliefs about self-efficacy and our ability to function in the world and our ability to function in a practical way in the world. It's all tied up together. But by moment, just saying, what am I actually feeling? And accepting, allowing and integrating in the moment. It's fine to feel this way. Of course it's frustrating. Of course it's disappointing. That's fine. All is well. And there we go. Now it's processed. And because it's processed at the time, it doesn't carry over into the next day or the next week. It doesn't add to this pile of repressed feeling. It gets processed there and then, dissolved in the light of awareness. Now, what this does is it begins to develop our deep sense of emotional safety, and it develops an accurate intuition. It develops the ability to understand deeply what it is you're actually feeling. And this is going to be very powerful for when you go into dedicated, focused shadow work sessions, meditations, where you sit for long periods of time, just allowing emotion after emotion after emotion to rise up. It's necessary to have this tool to actually feel exactly what it is, because some of these emotions, and this will stun you, some of these emotions you will not have felt for many years, and they can be very disorienting. They can come right out of left field, and you simply come to a very stark realization that you haven't felt certain emotions for a very long time, very long. And so we need to have this automatic, immediate reaction. When the presence of a strong emotion is detected, you immediately go to, what am I feeling? Don't go to the mind. Don't go to the coping mechanisms. Don't go to narratives. Don't go to stories. Don't go to internal arguments with yourself or with others. Instead, go to the feeling itself. Bring the feeling so close that it's no longer a threat. A metaphor that Rupert Spira uses. I love him, by the way. I highly recommend you check out his work if you are resonating with some of what I'm saying here. He says, he uses the analogy of two boxers. You know, in a boxing ring, they're fighting each other. And when they're both fighting each other and get completely exhausted, so exhausted they can't keep their defenses up anymore, they will do what's called a clinch, where you go so close to the other boxer that you actually hug the other boxer. You're hugging your opponent. And what this does, by bringing your opponent so close and embracing your opponent so tightly, they can't punch you. Right? It's the closeness that is the safety. Can we bring the emotion so close, so close, so close, and accept and love and allow so deeply it's no longer a threat. It was just an emotion this whole time. So that's the first level of this practice. What am I actually feeling? The second level of this practice is particularly useful if you have any chronic physical symptoms or chronic physical health or reoccurring physical health things that you've never quite been able to get to the bottom of, that doctors never got to the bottom of. And obviously, disclaimer here, if you have any sort of chronic health thing going on, see a doctor first, because it's always better if there's a medical cause, they can solve it in a medical way. But this is when they're stumped and you're stumped and you don't quite understand what's going on. Could look at things like frequent headaches, back pain, joint pain, migraines, constant fatigue. That's a very common one, fatigue. Just something physical, whatever it is. And even if you don't have a condition in itself, just kind of being aware of the body. This is an integrated, embodied element of the practice. And the reason this is necessary and important is because we actually store emotion in the body. When we repress, bury, resist or avoid an emotion, it has to go somewhere. It can't actually just disappear into the ether. It actually has to go somewhere. And sadly, it's often buried in the body. Very common places for it to go is the back, the hips, the digestive system, the head, the joints. I know I'm pretty much just listing every area of the body now, but there's just many common places we often feel it. And there's a huge emotional connection between the body and emotions. We say, there's gut instinct, gut feeling. We say we're walking around with a heavy heart. You actually feel it. We say you have a chip on your shoulder. We say we're carrying a heavy burden. These are all things when we're talking about emotion, but they have a physical analogy. This physical analogy is far more accurate than we would ordinarily dare to recognize, but it is so accurate it will stun you. We say a pain in the neck. There's someone who's a pain in the neck or a pain in the bum. So if you feel pain there, it might give us a clue as to how somebody may have affected you in the past. So what we're going to do here is just open the whole body into the light of emotional awareness, and particularly any areas of the body that you ordinarily feel are tense, tight, or carry some kind of health condition, whatever it is. That persistent, chronic feeling in the body that you've never quite been able to get to the bottom of. Bring that feeling, the physical sensation, fully into the light of awareness and ask yourself, if this physical sensation was an emotion, which emotion would it be? Okay, we're going to do that again. Open your awareness to the entire body. The whole thing. Don't let any area of the body fall into numbness, into the shadow. Don't let any area of the body fall out of your conscious awareness. Just be aware of the whole thing. Top of your head to the tip of your toes, flood the body with awareness. And any area that jumps out to you as an area of interest, ask yourself, if this sensation was an emotion, which emotion would it be? The answer is often surprising. I found my chronic back pain was repressed grief. I felt my reoccurring eczema is actually repressed rage. You know, they say skin conditions. It's like when they flare up, they say, oh, that's very angry. You know, your skin's having a very angry reaction. It's like, well, that's very accurate. Very accurate. Repressed rage. So there's two things happening here. One, we're actually utilizing, this is transmutation. We're actually transmuting our pain. We're transmuting our health issue into awareness, transmuting it into intuition and insight. How amazing is that? The alchemists, when they came up with transmutation, were transmuting lead into gold. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We are transmuting our own pain, our own dissatisfaction, tension, tightness, restlessness, agitation, transmuting it into powerful spiritual knowledge for yourself. In the same way that manure makes the best fertilizer, you know? Transmute, transmute, transmute. So that's the first thing that happens. We begin to develop a recognition of the connection between emotion and body. Very powerful, very necessary if you're looking at your mental and emotional health. It's very simple as well. Just constantly ask, is this a physical sensation or is it an emotion? It might seem obvious to begin with, but over time you realize it's not so obvious, actually. How interesting. In some ways, it's almost like the body is made out of emotion. In some ways. How interesting is that? This also brings our awareness to recognize that emotion can be a chameleon. This is very crucial. This is a pivotal point that I don't hear discussed nearly often enough. Emotion is a chameleon. It can masquerade as something else. It's kind of terrifying, I know, when you recognize this, but it's also remarkably liberating. Emotion can masquerade as other things. Sadness, grief can manifest as pain in the body. All emotion can manifest somehow in the body. Emotion can actually masquerade as other emotions. Often our anger or our rage actually has its roots in something else. So if we're angry, it turns out we're actually afraid. Or if we're feeling afraid, it turns out we're actually guilty. Or if we're feeling guilty, we're actually grieving. This is remarkable how emotion does this, but this is why all of these practices we're doing here are focused on awareness. Awareness, wisdom, intuition. Just truth. Truth. The truth will set you free. We're not going to allow the emotions to masquerade as anything else anymore. We need to just feel things as they are. And that's what will give rise to a natural health. As said before, all emotion is healthy. All emotion is healthy. But it's only when we allow ourselves to feel the emotion as an emotion that it no longer needs to masquerade as something else in order to get your attention. That's why emotion masquerades as physical pain. because you're not paying attention to the emotion. You need to. And because you're so good at repressing and avoiding the emotion, you've been doing it since childhood, so you're really well practiced at it. You're really good at it, and rightly so, of course. You did what you needed to do. But you're so good at it that the emotion needs to find another way in order to be felt. It needs to get your attention somehow. And so that's why it sometimes shows up as pain. It has to. It's the only way for you to pay attention. And pain is unignorable, unavoidable. It's similar to when just our daily lives, if our daily life has become so dysfunctional, so unmanageable, this is a way that you've unconsciously created circumstances in which you need to take a deeper look. Again, this happened to me in my personal experience. I was refusing to do the shadow work. I was refusing to. I was doing everything else on earth possible to try and heal and grow and recover. And I was doing pretty well at it as well. I was doing all my CBT and all of my meditation and all of my physical training and practicing AVRT to overcome my addiction, all of that. Even my nutrition was 100% on point. I thought I had absolutely everything nailed and I was doing real good. But there was some deep, deep repressed emotions that I simply did not want to face. And so what happened is those deeply repressed emotions manifested as a back injury, a catastrophic back injury. And this back injury took me out of my beloved profession of personal training. It took me out of my life. It took me away from my friends. It took me away from my family. It took me away from physical training, which was previously what I was doing, I thought, to help me with my mental health. Turns out I was using it as a method of avoiding my deeper repressed emotions. So these deep repressed emotions manifested as a back injury, and I had no choice. I had no choice but to lay there in pain and face what I'd been refusing to face. If I'd have known this a little sooner, at the first glimmerings of the back pain rising up in the body, the first signs that something was not quite right in my recovery plan, and if I'd asked myself if this was an emotion, which emotion would it be, I'd have come across repressed shame a lot sooner, repressed grief a lot sooner, repressed rage a lot sooner, and my body wouldn't have had to do what it did in order to get my attention. So, I recommend you do it sooner rather than later. Whew. Boy, oh boy. What a fascinating journey this really is. It's really quite amazing. Wow. Sorry, one sec. The thing that I was refusing to see the most was just how much the dysfunction of my birth family was affecting me. And that was it. If I'd have seen that sooner, then I'd have saved myself a lot of difficulty. Yeah, anyway. The third level of this practice. So this is for when you're really you've come to the place where it's time to really do this. Where you've come to the place where you go, yep, I need to do this, and I'm tired of all the mind activity, I'm tired of all the stuff, I'm tired of the therapy sessions and the modalities and the practices and all of the stuff I've been doing, and you say, you know what, it's time to actually just face this. How do you actually do that? The first thing is I would recommend becoming quite well practiced in meditation itself first. We have to find a way to focus attention and become comfortable with sitting for periods of time with the ability to focus your attention. So I would say, hopefully, as a prerequisite to shadow work, you don't always have this luxury, but if you can, start practicing some form of meditation first. Just, even if nothing else, just practicing 5-10 minutes a day of just focusing on the breath, just bringing your awareness to the sensations of breathing. And that's it. Just fully present, fully here, fully now, and just allowing yourself to be in the moment. And this will just begin to train your body and mind to be able to sit with focused attention for a period of time. We often lack this ability due to the relentless barrage of attention-grabbing entertainment and material we have in the modern world. That is an area that doesn't help us about the modern technological culture. So a lot of us feel like we don't have the attention necessary for meditation, but it's something that can be trained. You can train it, just like you train your body. Train your attention too. And then, to do the actual shadow work. So we've already come to the understanding that it's about unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. And in order to ensure that we really are going real deep into this, you have to become fully willing to feel what you least want to feel. The Latin phrase instacilnis invenitur means you will find it in the filth. And that is where we're going to have to go in order to get this stuff up into the loving light of awareness. It will be the very last place you want to go. And I appreciate how painful this is and how rough this is, but it's necessary. It's necessary. And just to reaffirm here the paradoxical nature of this, because let's say, for example, I used the example previously of the child coming downstairs to find that his or her parents have thrown all the toys away. We understand now that the parents should not have done this, but paradoxically we need to feel the rage that the child initially felt. You then need to ensure that you feel the shame that you felt when you erupted with that angry outburst and the parents mocked, shamed you, perhaps even beat you for showing that emotion. And you were shamed for it. You were told you need to be grateful. They're not your toys anyway. They're our toys. We own them and we own you. So we can do whatever we like. And then they sent you to your room. You'll have felt a lot of shame. But even as a child, you knew that you shouldn't have had to go through that. There is an inherent sense of justice in awareness itself. And if you are a very conscious child, which if you're listening to this podcast, I imagine that you were, right? I see you. I know exactly what you're about. You're a very conscious individual, aren't you? Very emotionally aware, very emotionally switched on. And because of that, you will have been aware of this total injustice that happened. And so although you were feeling shame at the time, it got kind of twisted up, buried and repressed. And now, paradoxically, and I know this doesn't really make sense, you need to allow yourself to feel that shame. You allow yourself to feel it, even though you know the parents were wrong to do what they did. You know that. But you still have to feel the shame. Why? Because shame itself is a natural, healthy emotion, and you are denied the right to feel it the way that it should be felt. If the parents and caregivers, the school and the culture around you was emotionally healthy, emotionally mature, and emotionally well-resourced, then all of the emotions that you felt as a child would have been felt at the right time, in the right way, and would have had the right outcome. For example, maybe as a child you did something that was shameful, because children do, then you're new to the world as a child. You might act in a way, you might steal something, or you were nasty, or you acted in a bullying way, or something along those lines. In a healthy way, you would feel ashamed that you did that. A healthy caregiver would have talked you through why it's not right to do what you did, why that behaviour wasn't healthy, it's not what we like, it's not the way we do things. You'd have felt a small amount of shame, you'd have said sorry, and you would make a decision to not do that behaviour again. That's how shame should be felt. That's why it's there. It's a healthy emotion. And it's a very powerful emotion when it comes to our behaviours, learning behaviours. And because it's a powerful way of altering behaviours in children and behaviours in adults as well. Shame is a very powerful emotion for altering behaviours. That's why shame is used as a tool of manipulation. That's why shame is used as a powerful mechanism of oppression, is by shaming, because it changes the way we behave. So if you had emotionally immature, negligent, toxic parents or caregivers, when they applied that, when they recognized how powerful shaming was to give themselves an easy life and to make you behave in the way that was convenient for them, they will have recognized, we can just continually shame this child, and that will result in an easier life for us. Whenever they make decisions that are based on what they want and they neglect what you need, and you have an emotional reaction to this, they will shame you for having that emotion. Right? It is reprehensible. It's disgusting behaviour, it's evil behaviour, it's unconscious behaviour, and it's tragically common. Very common. Particularly in the generation just previous to this one. Very common. Terrifying. Worth looking at. So, let's say in that example, we need to now get back in touch with shame. We need to recognise that actually shame itself can be healthy. It's there for a reason. It helps us to orient our behaviour in a healthy and socially conducive way. So we need to get back in touch with it because we need to re-feel how it should have been felt, how it should be processed, and it's the way that it should have been within your emotional spectrum and your conscious awareness the whole time. And it's so sad that it hasn't been, because these emotions are sacred. They're yours. You should have had the freedom. You have the right to feel them. And they were denied. They were denied to you by people who have never faced their own shadow. So to sit in this practice, we're going to have to go back to that time. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it went this way. I'm sorry this happened to you. And I'm sorry that you're now, yet again, you're the one who has to go through this work. You're yet again the one who is labouring through this because others refused to do the work that they should have done. They messed up. You didn't mess up. They did. And now you're paying the price for it yet again. It's dark. I know this is shadow work. It's dark. It's rough. It's the sharpest end of the wedge in the healing journey. But here we are. There's no going back now. No going back. Because once you've mastered this, then the justice has happened. You have brought yourself back to the light. And you can get on with living the life that you should have been living all along. The universe will restore your wasted years. no matter how bad it's been for you thus far, no matter how tough, no matter how hard. No matter what's happened, it will all be restored by doing this work. Justice will be done. Because you did not fall victim to this. You did not fall into the darkness yourself. You chose to become conscious. You chose to become healthy. You chose to become well. You made that choice. You made the difficult choice. You're doing the hard work. You're doing the hard work that the others refused to do. And they will fall into more and more unconscious patterns of behavior. Don't worry about them. Once you've healed some of this negative energy out of yourself, it will return to them. I don't even know how, but it just does. It's weird. And just leave them to their own, demons bind themselves to hell. They do it themselves. Just leave them alone, and they just watch with awe at just how committed to staying miserable they really are. But you're not committed to that. You're committed to health and healing. So here's what we do. You sit in meditation and say to yourself, please, let me see what I don't want to see. Please let me go where I least want to go. And please, let me feel what I can't want to feel. Now, something may not immediately spring out of its hiding place. This is okay. This is fine. This is why we take the time to do this. We must practice patience. These are feelings that have been dormant for a very long time. They're not going to immediately come straight out and be integrated straight away. We must simply be still and patient, and we are handing control over to the emotion itself. Let the emotion be the teacher. The solution to the pain is in the pain, as Rumi said. So simply handing over the reins to the emotion, and if it doesn't feel like coming out into the light of awareness, then we can practice patience with this. There is no rush, there is no hurry. And what this looks like, if something does arise, is often we feel a perhaps shock or surprise when a certain emotion rises up that is particularly unpleasant and socially taboo, such as hate or resentment. Now, herein we must remember no behavior is going to arise from this emotion. We are not about to do something. The only thing that is necessary to do here is just be. Just allow and just accept. And if it's hatred that rises up, then let it be there. This may be the first time you've ever simply practiced just allowing the emotion to be as it is, as unpleasant as it is, and negative in its charge. Well, there it is. There's nothing we can do about that. It's already there. And in time, we find that this intensely negative emotion can just unfurl itself, unravel itself, And we can repeatedly just say it's okay to be here. You don't necessarily need to act on anything. There's no behaviour arising from this emotion, and you don't need to tell anyone about it either. It's between conscious awareness and the emotion now, that's all. There's no need to do anything. Now, we may find that we can touch an emotion very briefly, and then immediately just find ourselves lost in a stream of thoughts again. This is totally normal. There's no sense in being hard on yourself about this. If you find you can feel an emotion briefly and then immediately get lost in narratives, in the mind's stories, well, this is just why it's a practice. It's going to take some time. Whatever that emotion is, hatred, rage, envy, shame, disgust, resentment, just acknowledge that it's there. It's already there, you're not creating it. Just acknowledge that it's there. And notice the mind pattern is full of shoulds and should nots. I shouldn't feel this way, or I should feel a different way, or it's silly to feel a certain emotion. This is all part of the mind activity that represses, avoids, resists. So we're not interested in should. We are just interested in what is. Now you know that practice and principle. You simply practice it over and over again. And there isn't that much more complicated to do here, because complicated is the realm of the mind. Complicated is the realm of narratives, thought, and thinking, and all of those things are the mechanism of repression. So, although shadow work is some of the hardest work you can do, it's also the most simple, because the approach is always the same. Although the emotions are often different, although the emotions are often surprising and can be very chaotic, the intention that we apply to all the emotions is always the same. It never changes. You just say, I love you. Thank you for being here. Please come into the light of awareness. I'm not going to change you. I don't want to change you. I don't need to change you. You are free. You have my energy. You have my body. You have the space of life. You have all of this. You are free. You are free to be as you are. And that's all. And you just repeatedly do this. And what this does is bring the light of conscious awareness to that area. Because the more you do this, the deeper the parts of yourself are going to come up. Because once one little emotion now suddenly is free and feels safe to come out, the rest are going to come as well. Now, my heart is with you as you do this, because I know from experience just how tumultuous and chaotic, how uncomfortable and painful this can be. I'm also so excited for you, because I hope that throughout this talk there may have just been a little glimmer of intuition and understanding, and you'll have felt that little bit of hope, that small bright spark of hope. And the reason for that is once you really start to feel this, you know that things are changing, that things are rapidly about to change for you, that that there is a profound transformation here as you realize that the previous way of living has served its function and there's something new about to happen. Things change here once you are deep in the shadow, because you are getting deep into the foundations. This is deep into the structure of your entire identity. The entire ego is a trauma response in itself, the whole thing. So once we go to what initiated all of this whole identity to even begin with, you can just feel this. There is something very powerful happening and about to happen now. Something is about to change. And as painful as it is, it's a sense of it hurts good. It hurts so good. In the same way that when you're training in the gym, in exercise, it's burning, you're pumping your legs, you're training on the treadmill, your legs are burning, you're sweating, you're pumping the iron, it's burning the muscle. It hurts, it's uncomfortable, but it hurts so good. It's just right. And it's taking you somewhere. It's of benefit. And there are many other things that hurt so good, right, ladies? So, sorry. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Once conscious awareness is on that area that hurts so bad, it starts to hurt so good. And you will find remarkable things happen. Times that ordinarily you felt a lot of anxiety, it's just not there anymore. It's gone. And you're not burying it or hiding it. It's simply not there anymore. Whole areas that you used to think were just something you're going to have to put up with your whole life just falls away. The depression disappears. The anxiety disappears. The addiction disappears. It's easier to stick to your diet and nutrition. Why? Because you're no longer self-medicating. You're no longer self-soothing. Why? Because now you have a natural, healthy relationship with your own emotions. You know they're fine. You know that you're fine, that everything's fine. There's no issue, there's no problem. Wow, what a remarkable change and transformation that's going to be. We also found when you repress one emotion, you repress them all. You just can't help it. It's like the aperture on a camera. You turn the light down or you turn the light up. Or perhaps a better analogy might be, if you've ever done any editing on an image for your Instagram or something like that, you have a slider where you can turn the brightness up or down. If you repress one emotion, you turn the brightness down on all emotions. But now we're not turning the brightness down on any emotion. Bring it on, all of it. The rage, the hate, the shame, the guilt, the regret. Turn it all up. Yeah, let's have it. Let's have it. Courage. Let's feel it. And then you notice the brightness comes up on all the other emotions as well. Happiness, joy, bliss, love, comfort. All of these areas of your experience, suddenly they can be felt too. Because you've turned the brightness up on the entire image. So I'm so excited for you in your journey. This is what's coming for you. And it will happen quickly. Very quickly. The slider will be turned up, up, up. We just have to be willing to face all of the areas we'd rather not feel. And that way we can feel the areas we'd rather feel more intensely. Powerful, transformative work, and I applaud you for doing it. It's not easy. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes resources. And I always say thank you towards the end of this sort of talk and this sort of work, because when you do this work, you are bringing the light of conscious awareness to an area of humanity. And we need more conscious people in this world, because if you're conscious, if you're healing, if you're healthy, if you're aware, if you're awakening, then you're going to behave in ways that are very healthy and conducive to improving the emotional well-being of the entire planet. There's very few people doing this work. Everyone wants to do outer stuff. Everyone wants to try and change the world, fix the world, save the world. And very rarely does anyone actually address the deeper parts of themselves. But if everyone on Earth addressed the deeper parts of themselves, there'd be no more problems on planet Earth. Humanity is carrying a very dark shadow. By bringing light to yours, you're actually brightening the entire image. So thank you. Thank you for doing this work. I think that's everything, team. Again, if you're listening on Spotify, go check me out on YouTube. It's just Corin Bryant. If you're listening on YouTube, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're feeling generous, I appreciate all the donations and paid channel memberships that I can get. Because, like I say, the car failed its MOT. And that's quite a bill. But, yeah. So oh, dear. Thank you so much for listening. I wish you all the very best. Good luck. Stay with it. Have courage. You can do this. Take care. Be well. And stay present.